This is BreakPoint This Week, a weekly briefing on faith, culture, worldview, and mission with John Stonestreet, president of the Colson Center for Christian Worldview.
Well, welcome to BreakPoint This Week. John Stonestreet here, and it's actually good to be in the same room with Warren Smith. I know our producer, Steve, makes it sound like we're always, face to face, but usually we are in differing hotel rooms across the country or something like that, but we're actually in the same room in Chicago.
Yeah, in the Chicago area, I guess Deerfield technically. I'm not exactly sure. I'm not too sure.
I think officially we're in Lincolnshire down the street from Deerfield. That's right. But this was where I went to a seminary, Trinity Evangelical Divinity School.
And now you're back here speaking at the Touchstone conference, and I'm here helping sort of carry your bags and represent the Colson Center, and it's a delight to do so.
Just to be official, Warren is not carrying not a single one of my bags. I just want to make that.
It was a metaphor.
Look, if you follow me on Twitter, you'll know that I'm a diva when it comes to TSA, but I am not a diva when it comes to somebody else carrying my bags.
That's right. You carry your own bags, but I'm here as a representative of this Colson Center, not speaking, but you are speaking at this conference.
Yeah, it's a fascinating conference. It was one of the things I was privileged to be a part of. What an incredible group of individuals wrestling with, joining a conversation that we've been a part of at the Colson Center with one of our online symposia a couple years ago. Certainly a lot of conversations, a couple BreakPoint commentaries, a podcast interview or two with Rod Dreher, the author of the Benedict option. And, of course, Rod has tried to offer through the Benedict option and kind of an ongoing work-in-progress proposal for what it looks like for Christians to live well in this cultural moment. And in fact, if you come to breakpoint.org, click on the link on the homepage that says resources mentioned on the radio and podcast. We'll link you to that symposia. I think we had about almost 20 different authors weigh in, kind of an evaluation of this, I think, a really important book. And this conference is hosted by our friends at Touchstone magazine, a terrific journal. It's called A Journal of Mere Christianity, and it really is that. There's some remarkable voices trying to weigh in on the Benedict option in this cultural moment.
Yeah, the conference is called Fight or Flight, and I don't think anybody really wants to flee the culture, including Rod Dreher. And as you said, we've already heard a couple of great speakers. As you and I are recording this, it's on Thursday night. I guess it's okay to say that, right?
The cat's out of the bag.
Yeah, yes, that's right. The cover is blown, right? The man behind the curtain has shown himself. But as we're recording this on Thursday night, we've already heard some great speakers. We heard Tony Esolen, who, by the way, will be a part of our short course next week. And we've heard from Ross Douthat as well, and from Rod Dreher himself.
Yeah, that's right. And then tomorrow, we continued the lineup. I'm going to talk about whether, I wrestled with what to title it, whether I should call it, when I ended up calling it Benedict Kuyper, which is something that I've joked with Rod about, that there needs to be a Benedict Kuyper option. I kicked around two other titles, What Hath Benedict to Do with Kuyper, which is way more boring, or my personal favorite, which doesn't play very well, is What If Benedict and Kuyper Had a Baby? But that's just way too much of a culturally loaded reference.
Well, it is maybe, but I really love, John, your contribution to this conversation, because you are, we talk about Christian worldview, and for those of you that want to get geeky about this, Abraham Kuyper has been very helpful to us in helping us sort of craft what a Christian worldview means, that God's truth is valid and relevant for every sphere of culture, all spheres of culture, and Kuyper has helped us see that. It helped Chuck see that, Chuck Colson see that, and certainly has helped me see that. And the fact that you are bringing some Kuyperian logic to this conversation, I think, is going to be really helpful.
Well, I hope that it is, and I think what you just said is really important. I mean, if you followed the life and the work and the career of Chuck Colson and wondered kind of how did he go from wanting to just take the gospel into the prisons to really advocating for criminal justice reform and fighting for unity across Christian denominations and, trying to get Christians to engage on really important issues like life, marriage, and religious liberty. Why did Chuck do the sort of thing that he did? And it was because he was influenced by this Dutch theologian named Abraham Kuyper, who really believed that Christianity couldn't be cordoned off into a spiritual dimension only. It wasn't just a matter of personal, private faith. that when you say Christianity is true, you're making a statement about the world, and the application keeps going. And that's, of course, what drives us still to this day at the Colson Center. It's why we do what we do. It's every single BreakPoint, I like to think, has a little bit of Kuyper's fingerprints on it. And if you want to read more about Abraham Kuyper, a couple places where you can do that. In fact, I would really encourage you to do it. I think the place to start really is Richard Mouw's little brief biography of Abraham Kuyper. And you can learn more about this Dutch Renaissance man who did a little bit of everything.
He did, yeah. Prime minister, a politician at the highest level, theologian at the highest level, an educator at the highest level, and he was the editor of the largest, or one of the largest newspapers in the Netherlands as well.
And at the same time, I do want to say, Warren, too, that one of the things I'm going to talk about tomorrow at the conference is that the Benedict option, as Rod has put it, is reminding the church of some really, really important things. And so there's also a wonderful contribution that Rod, I think, has made in that book, even though I don't fully go along with it. And I would kind of tweak it here and there. Sure. But I tell you, it's a conversation that is certainly way overdue.
And ongoing. I mean, the fact that the book was written several years ago and we're having this conference today, I think is a testimony to the sort of the durability of these ideas and the importance of the ideas.
Yeah, and by the way, just since we're talking about this and we're making recommendations and people don't have enough books to read, you mentioned Ross Douthat, the New York Times columnist, and his book, Bad Religion, was summarized tonight. And that, to me, is another really important book. And he said something that I want to bring up because it really shapes, again, a lot of our vision of what we do at the Colson Center. He said that basically there are three big worldviews in this cultural moment in the West. The first, of course, is a more secular vision. This dominates the academy, institutions, entertainment. Basically, it's the kind of the perspective of the elites. And then kind of what we often call spiritual but not religious, kind of pop spirituality, really characterized by a personal experience but anti-authoritarian. In other words, you go to Buddhism for a good experience, but you're not necessarily going to become a Buddhist. You might get little bits and pieces of Christianity, but that doesn't mean you're going to let the Bible tell you what to think and what to do. And then, of course, the third kind of worldview would be the traditionalist Christianity. He was talking about the shortcomings of secularism and of what he called kind of the new paganism, and then how maybe Christians could respond. And, a shortcoming, he said, of secularism, first of all, is that there's a basic incoherence where it wants to hold on to things, for example, like human dignity, while untethering from the only thing that ever gave human dignity to the world in the first place.
Which is that we were made in the image and likeness of God.
Yeah, that's right. And then also with this kind of whole new, what did he call it? A new great awakening. That was a great phrase.
It was. You and I both laughed when he said that.
I'm going to use that one. But this new wokeness and this new activism that we see is irritating and is confusing, and it even as harmful as it can be. It does reveal a yearning for transcendence and coherence. That's really part of the human condition. And if you think about that, both of those are opportunities for the gospel. The first one, this kind of basic incoherence of secularism and how the ideas of secularism can't lead to the results that we want. That's an opportunity for Christians to become intellectually engaged. So that's a call to worldview. It's a call for us to know why we believe what we believe, to know what other worldviews say, and actually be able to intellectually engage with that. The yearning for transcendence and coherence. I mean, that's a longing for creativity and beauty, and to apply Christian worldview as a way to kind of give a bigger vision and connect us to the transcendent. And then finally, the theological incoherence of paganism, just really the inability to draw the line between good theology and bad theology if the only place you're looking for authority is inside. Well, that's a great opportunity to know theology. So it was kind of a call for the church that we should know worldview. We should live it out and expressing ourselves through things like beauty and art and storytelling and entrepreneurship and all those things. We should have strong community and institutions or robust church life, and we should know theology so we can tell the difference between good ideas and bad ideas about God. And I thought, man, that's kind of a good roadmap.
Well, it sure is, and the thing that I came away, John, is number one, we Christians should have confidence because we have these things. This is part of our birthright as Christians.
None of those four things are weaknesses in the Christianity.
Exactly right. And the other side of that coin is they are things that are badly needed by the world. Our Wilberforce weekend this year is Christianity still good for the world? And the answer is yes, and those are the ways that it's good.
You're listening to BreakPoint this week. Come to breakpoint.org. Click on the link on the homepage. It says resources mentioned on the radio and podcast, and we will link you to our symposium on the Benedict option as well as some other resources that we mentioned and continue to talk about here on today's program. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
We invite you to visit BreakPoint.org, and while you're at our website, be sure to browse our online Colson Center store of books and other resources, and you can find links to our social media sites like Facebook and Twitter.
Well, we're back on BreakPoint this week. John Stonestreet along with Warren Smith. Warren, I think we're supposed to actually talk about the news items on this program. So there's certainly a lot of stories.
Yeah, there has been a lot of stories this week.
Let's start with one that we wrote about this past week on BreakPoint. And again, we'll link to that on our website. But a shocking announcement on Sunday night, an announcement from the president that shocked not only, news outlets, people on the left often act shocked by everything that the president does. This one, though, legitimately, the intelligence community, Republicans, Democrats, a decision that he had hinted at, but I don't think anyone kind of thought that would come as kind of complete and holistic and as immediate as it did, to pull about 1,000 American troops out of a region of northeast Syria that was a Kurd stronghold, in which our Kurdish allies, who have been really one of our staunchest and most loyal allies in fighting ISIS, but also are seen as terrorists by Turkey. And so those troops were basically holding back an invasion by Turkey. And Turkey had made it known. They don't want the Kurds there. And it seemed in the announcement that President Trump was basically saying, we're getting out, and Turkey's going to move forward, almost like a green light, or I don't want to say it's an invitation because that's not what it was. But the chorus of criticism was complete from the right and the left. Lindsey Graham, Mitch McConnell, and I certainly was quick to talk about this because there are so many problems with this decision. And I want to point everyone, if you did not catch our podcast on Wednesday with Mindy Belz of World Magazine. She talked us through this from start to finish. Who are the Kurds? What's the conflict with Turkey? What are the consequences of this decision, especially for Christian minorities in this region?
Yeah. Well, and Tony Perkins at the Family Research Council and
Franklin Graham,
people who have been staunch allies of the president up until now, expressed dismay at this decision. And sure enough, just a couple of days later, I think you said that the president made the announcement on Sunday night. By Wednesday, the Turks were already invading Syria, or at least bombing Syria.
Yeah, and the scope of the invasion, I think, it took the White House by surprise. I mean, I think the president's thought was a threat of economic sanctions, which had secured the freedom of Andrew Brunson, a Turkish prisoner, a year ago, would deter the Turkey from invading the area. It did not.
No, it certainly didn't. And they invaded, and of course, already some Kurdish fighters have died in that fighting that's taken place since Wednesday. There have been civilian casualties there as well. The Kurds have expressed outrage and really just disappointment and dismay. Some of their leaders have at the United States, and it's a really tough situation. It'd be interesting that the president has done so many things that his supporters have overlooked, and yet in this particular case, they're not overlooking it. I don't know that this is a defining moment or we're experiencing a watershed here in terms of evangelical support for the president, but it does feel different. It does feel different in some significant ways.
That's a hard one to tell. We'll see where that kind of plays itself out. But I want folks to understand this, because there are 4 reasons that this is a dangerous, dangerous move. The first is that, again, as we said, ISIS has been on the run. It's been largely defeated systemically, but there's still thousands of ISIS fighters in that region. And one of the reasons is because of the Kurdish fighters helping us out with this. Well, listen, if the Kurds have to turn all their attention to holding back an invasion from Turkey, then that means any progress that we've had with ISIS is going to be short-lived. We know what happened when President Obama quickly withdrew troops from Iraq, how that re-emboldened the terrorists there, reorganized them. That's the same thing that's feared again. The second thing is that there's about 10,000 ISIS prisoners. In fact, we already have reports that some of the most high-profile ones, or the most dangerous ones, were transferred to American custody and moved to Iraq. That was a Band-Aid put on really a bad situation, because what happens in the long term with those 10,000 prisoners?
Well, that's right. In fact, I've heard some news reports that some of the Kurdish troops that were guarding those prisoners have already abandoned their posts just because they're concerned about their family and their own safety, and that's going to potentially allow these 10,000 prisoners to escape and reinvigorate the ISIS fighting forces in that region.
Yeah. The third reason has to do with persecuted religious minorities. I mean, we are talking about the region of the world where the ancient Christian communities of the world exist. And that Kurdish region has been a protected haven for Christians and even Yazidi and other, religious minority groups. And Turkey doesn't have that same level of religious liberty.
Well, you're right. You mentioned Andrew Brunson earlier, and John, and I had the opportunity to interview Andrew Brunson this week, and he sort of educated me about Erdogan and the Turkish government. They are not friends of Christians at all there. I mean, Turkey was really in many ways one of the birthplaces of Christianity. Today, according to Andrew Brunson, there are more than 80 million people that live in Turkey, less than 6,000 Christians in that country.
Yeah, that's right.
And that is a country that is not a friend to Christianity at all.
Well, and it's more than that. It's not just that, Turkey invades and they're not friendly to Christians. What we know is in times of chaos like that, Christians and other religious minorities, but especially Christians, especially when you're talking about a heavily Islamic region, they become convenient targets. It's like, I know we're fighting other people, but the opportunity to persecute the infidel seems to be too tempting to resist in a lot of parts of the world. And that's a real fear that has played itself over and over and over in the Middle East. Whenever there's instability, Christians has become the victims, the convenient targets, the convenient victims of violence. And then the final thing is look, the Kurdish forces are our allies. This says a lot about the reliability of the United States as an ally around the world.
Yeah, that was the point that Lindsey Graham made very strongly. And, and I don't agree with Lindsey Graham about everything by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think that that's a pretty powerful point, that one of the things that causes America to have such a high standing around the world is that in general we keep our word. We do what we say we're going to do. And Lindsey Graham made the point, if we're going to run out on our allies there, how do our other allies around the world have any confidence that we won't run out on them at some future date?
Well, look, we'd ask everyone to join with a whole lot of faith leaders. We mentioned Franklin Graham earlier and others, but have asked, pray, make your voice heard. Come to BreakPoint.org. We'll tell you how to get in touch and make your opinion and your voice known to congressional leaders, to the White House, and so on. And pray that God will turn around this situation, that President Trump would change his mind. The chaos has started. The invasion has started. And this was not a good decision at any stretch of the imagination. Well, you're listening to BreakPoint this week. John Stonestreet here along with Warren Smith. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
You can learn more about BreakPoint and the Colson Center for Christian Worldview when you visit breakpoint.org. That's breakpoint.org.
Back on BreakPoint this week, John Stonestreet here along with Warren Smith. Let's go to the NBA. What a week in the NBA. Hey, you're from North Carolina.
I am, but you're the basketball guy.
I am the basketball guy, yeah. Well, I mean, I like it. I'm short and slow, so I don't know what that means, but I can still shoot. But look, you're from North Carolina. We remember during the whole HB2 thing, the transgender bathroom thing, that the NBA was one of the organizations that a moment of what we might call moral clarity in their own minds, that this was unacceptable. The threat was to pull out of North Carolina for the All-Star game and so on. They were crystal clear. This week, when it comes to a increasingly cozy relationship with about 500 million is what I heard. 500 million Chinese people watch NBA games.
That's right. More people than live in the United States.
You just do the math
watch
here.
The game in China.
That's right. And there's merchandise and there's everything else that goes along with it. Well, when that relationship was threatened, there was not nearly the level of more clarity from Adam Silver or from NBA owners or even NBA players and coaches about forced abortions, about the harvesting of organs from Muslim Uyghurs, and about the systemic persecution of Christians and other religious minorities. So the NBA is reeling this week as they're trying to trip all over themselves to maintain this relationship. The story goes back to a tweet. How many things in our culture break down because of Twitter?
That to me is an amazing part of the story, John, is that you're right. It started with the tweet. I mean, President Trump is moving the national conversation with Twitter. And, some years ago in North Africa, there was the so-called Twitter revolution. And now, of course, a tweet is one single tweet from a single NBA or Houston Rockets executive that started this whole thing. I mean, we really live in a different world than we did 10 or 15 years ago.
It's been interesting. So the backstory is general manager for the Houston Rockets. A little bit of history. The relationship with China and the NBA started with the Houston Rockets. One of the great NBA centers, Yao Ming, certainly the best player up to this point to ever come out of China, Now, by the way, he's an executive in the China Basketball Association.
Yeah.
But the general manager of the Houston Rockets expressed support for Hong Kong. We've talked a lot about Hong Kong and the Hong Kong protest.
I mean, he said what any American should be allowed to say. It wasn't a fringe opinion. It was not stated in a harsh or critical way. It was, or should have been, a pretty innocuous statement.
Yeah, it was just happened to be the same week that the NBA was rolling out a series of games across China, which was promised to be broadcast. In response, even though the NBA commissioner Adam Silver, issued a quick statement saying that doesn't reflect the opinions of the Houston Rockets or the NBA, the relationship with the China Basketball Association and the Houston Rockets was severed. All the games that were supposed to be televised were pulled off of television. And, of course, there were Chinese teams over here playing as well. And it's just put a damper on the whole thing. Now, I want to say to his credit, but that's not quite fully the thing. Adam Silver did not condemn the fact that the general manager of the Houston Rockets expressed support for Hong Kong. What he said was he gave a half-hearted apology, and he basically said that it's a matter of free speech and we don't want to get in the way of free expression. But to support pro-democracy protesters shouldn't be a controversial issue.
No, it shouldn't.
And then it just got worse and worse and worse. It got worse because clearly the NBA and all the players and all the coaches agreed to the same talking point. And when Steve Kerr, coach of the Golden State Warriors, Steph Curry was asked about this, Robert Horry, who's an NBA legend, on a show, I actually saw this on the plane just this morning, asked, what do you think about this? And the answer is, well, that's too complicated. I don't know what to think about that. Interesting to me that transgender restrooms, that's a point of moral clarity. When it comes to human rights abuses and forced abortions, and that's not a point of moral clarity. Like, I don't know enough. And then, of course, there was a fan kicked out of the Philadelphia 76er arena. This was not in China. This is in Philadelphia, for having a sign that said Google Uyghurs, which is basically the Muslim population that's being persecuted in China. And the same thing happened at a Washington Wizards game. And then during a press conference, a CNN reporter was cut off. And it just goes on and on and on. Bad week for the NBA.
And catch the irony of that. Philadelphia. Philadelphia. That's where the Liberty Bell is, John. Washington, D.C. is our nation's capital.
The mascot of the Philadelphia is the 76ers. That's not referring to 1976 or 1876. It's referring to 1776.
Yeah, and, I got to say, we're laughing, but in some ways I'm laughing to keep from crying in this situation, because this is really an example of... we sometimes talk about, is America's footprint around the world, too great? Should we be drawing in? Should we not, we can't be the world's cop or whatever it might be. But the truth of the matter is we're an interconnected, world these days. And if we, as Christopher Hitchens used to say, if you may not be interested in politics, but politics is interested in you, we may not be interested in what's going on in China. We can say that that's their business and not our business, but guess what? They've made it our business, and they're controlling the way we behave, what we say here in the United States if we're not careful. World Magazine did an article recently about how the Chinese market is affecting the way Hollywood makes movies, because now even American movies get most of their revenue from overseas and not here in the United States. And we've got to be very, very, I don't know what the right answer is, John, but I just know that we need to be hypervigilant about making sure that the values that we care about in this country are not trampled on by not only by the people here in this country, but people in other countries.
Yeah,
as well.
but it's already happening, and that's the Chinese pressure. I mean, it's not just that we're influencing them. Clearly, they're influencing us. One quick story here before we call it a week. Ellen and George W. Bush, that was interesting. So Ellen got in trouble for sitting next to George W. Bush at a Dallas Cowboys game, went on the air, defended herself, and still, it wasn't good enough for some who said it's not okay to be friends with George W. Bush.
Well, to me, that's just a classic example of the tolerance of the intolerant, or the intolerance of the tolerant, And it really is almost a trip through the looking glass, if you want to say it that way, because the progressive left are usually the ones that say, there should be civility and there should be, a diversity of opinion, and yet in reality, there is such a moralistic worldview coming out of the progressive left these days. The only difference is it's whatever they determine to be the true and right moral position.
Yeah, the only thing I thought was, good heavens, if Martina Navratilova and Ellen DeGeneres aren't woke enough, you and I don't have a prayer, buddy.
You got a point there.
We could never be woke enough. Well, listen, thanks for listening to BreakPoint this week. Before we go for the week, I do want to mention that my colleague here, Warren Smith, will be leaving the Colson Center here, and as leaving the post as my co-host here on BreakPoint this week, taking the lead of a terrific ministry called Ministry Watch. And he's been great to have these weekly conversations with you, Warren. And from all of us at the Colson Center, we certainly wish you well in your new post, which as we've talked about, I think is one that's tailor-made for you. So we're sad about it, but wish you the best as you go forward.
Well, I really appreciate you saying that, John. It's been 4 really great years for me, and I'm sad to leave too, as a matter of fact. But I do believe that God has called me into this new season of life. But I leave with nothing but warm thoughts and fervent prayers for the continued fruitfulness of the Colson Center.
Well, thanks for listening to BreakPoint this week. John Stonestreet here, along for maybe the last time. Maybe we'll get a guest appearance here every once in a while. But Warren Smith, come to breakpoint.org, click on the link on the homepage that says resources mentioned on the radio and podcast, and we'll link you to various articles and things from today's program. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.